You're watching Adorama TV.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Adorama TV. This week we're going to be talking about something that a lot of people have written in and are very curious about, and that is a comparison between the Canon 1D Mark IV and the Nikon D3s. Well, the truth is both of these cameras are stellar, phenomenal, and so it's a little bit of Coke versus Pepsi on some of the things. But what I really want to do is, I've had both of these for a couple of months now and have been able to go out and shoot a bunch of things. I've shot still and video and low light situations, shot some action stuff, some sports, and just sort of went through the gamut of testing these cameras. And so I want to talk to you about some of the strengths and weaknesses of each, and then I'll give you a recommendation at the end of this video of which one of these two I think you should spend your money on. Well, first let's talk about the specifications. The sensor size on these are a little bit different. The Nikon has a larger sensor than the Canon. The Nikon has an FX sensor. For those of you that are familiar with Nikon, it's a 36 by 23.9 CMOS sensor, whereas the Canon has a 1.3 crop factor, which is a smaller sensor. It's a 27.9 by 18.6 millimeter CMOS sensor. So when I was shooting with these two side by side, sometimes I would gravitate toward the Nikon because I like having a larger sensor. So between them, I like the Nikon sensor a little bit better. Now let's talk about how amazing these sensors are. Their ISO range is, both of them, they start at ISO 100 and they go all the way up to ISO 12,800. It is unbelievable what you can do with these cameras. You know, I took them out and we shot at night on city streets and in areas that we had like just candles lighting up an area, and both of them could take pictures in ultra low situations, and both had very low noise. In fact, when I was looking at the Canon images, I was just amazed that we could get image quality that looked that good until I looked at the Nikon images, and I have to say that the Nikon noise is a lot less than the Canon noise. I mean, both of them almost non-existent, but the Nikon wins as far as image quality in low light situations. Now let's talk about the autofocus points. Now these guys both have just amazing autofocus system. In fact, the Canon 1D Mark III had a lot of issues with their autofocus system. It was in the press everywhere. So what Canon did was they threw that system out and they built a brand new autofocus system. And so this guy, the Canon, has 45 autofocus points, and of those, 39 are cross-type autofocus points if you have a 2.8 or faster lens. So most of the L lenses that are out there, professional lenses, are 2.8 or faster. And so this has an amazing ability. Now the Nikon actually has more autofocus points. It's got 51 points, but of those only 15 are cross-type. Now, in our testing, what I found was in low light situations, especially light situations where we had backlight, the sun coming behind somebody's head, or specifically in the studio with strong kicker lights and things, the Nikon actually had some problems focusing, and the Canon did not. And so of the two, I found that the Canon was a much faster focusing system, and so for studio work, the Canon actually performed a lot better than the Nikon did. Okay, now let's talk about ergonomics, because this is a big difference between the Nikons and the Canons. And I'm a Canon shooter. I've been shooting Canons for a couple decades now, I guess. And so I'm pretty used to how the Canons work. And so when I got my hands on a few Nikons earlier this year, at first everything was backwards. Pluses to the left and minuses to the right, and there's some things like that that drive me bonkers. But fortunately, you can reprogram your Nikon so that it does it right, or if you're a Nikon version, you're going to argue with me about that. But you can flip, you can customize all the output and the menus and stuff on your Nikon. You can do the same thing on the Canon as well. So I was able to configure both to really fit how I work. You can reprogram buttons and autofocus buttons and things like that. But the big difference is I found that the Nikon had much better ergonomics than the Canon. And what I mean by that is, my preference is I like a lot of the just manual dials that we have on these things. So if I want to change my shooting mode or my drive mode, I can just move this dial here. I can push a big button. If I want to change my metering mode, there is just a dial right here to do that. There's just a lot of dials that you can grab onto here and lock in your settings really fast instead of having to go through the menus on the Canon. Well, there's one ergonomic thing that drove me bonkers, though, on the Nikon, and maybe it's because I'm so used to shooting with the Canon, but that is the autofocus selection point. So when I'm trying to choose my autofocus point on a Canon, well, you can do that with the wheel back here and the dial up here, and it's really, really fast. Even if you flip to the vertical shooting mode, you're still right in the same position. Your thumb and finger fall right on those dials, exactly the same, vertical or horizontal. But on the Nikon, I found that wasn't the case. First of all, selecting the autofocus points with this little pad right here, I didn't think was very fast. You can't really rapidly go through the autofocus points. And when I go vertical, well, it's sort of out of range of my thumb, and so I constantly found myself reaching for that. And so I wish this was a little bit lower, and so that was the only thing I found about the Nikon's ergonomics that I really didn't like. And one other small thing, it's easy to fix, but the way that the vertical grips shutter release is, I kept hitting that on my leg and shutting off and firing off frames until I figured out that I could actually turn that off. So that one, again, I wish that I was a little bit more recessed. But overall, the ergonomics on the Nikon are far superior, in my opinion, to the Canon. Now, the nice thing about both of these cameras, they're made for photojournalists, they're made for sport shooters, and they really shoot fast. So the Canon shoots at 10 frames per second, the Nikon shoots at 9 frames per second, so they're almost identical, a little bit of an edge for the Canon. And they both have gigantic buffers, so if you're a shooter that really needs to lock in and shoot, well, they will go all day long. So I'm shooting at 10 frames per second, and the buffer on the Canon is an amazing 121 images if you're shooting in JPEG. On the Nikon, it's a little bit bigger, it's 130 images. Now, if you flip over and shoot RAW, well, the Nikon has a 40 image buffer, where the Canon only has 28. So the edge is for the Nikon for a larger buffer when you're shooting in RAW mode. Now, both of these guys shoot high definition video, and so we compared those two. Now, originally, I really liked the Nikon version a little bit better because it's shot in AVI files, which are easier to edit, in my opinion, than the movie files that the Canon cranks out, because the Canon files are H.264 encoded, which means they're compressed and it takes longer to render. But fortunately, if you're a Final Cut user, there's a plugin from Apple that allows you to edit H.264 files with no rendering, and so that sort of wipes out that issue. So that leaves one question, and that is, what is the resolution of each of these? Well, the Nikon shoots at 720p, but the Canon actually shoots in 1080p full HD. So we have a much larger sensor size. Okay, so what is the decision between the Nikon and the Canon? Which one is better? Well, as I said before, it's sort of Coke versus Pepsi, so they each do something better than the other. So let's start with the Canon. The Canon, I found, has faster autofocus, it's more accurate, it's better focusing when you're in a studio situation or in low light, and it's got higher resolution video. So the Canon is my choice for photojournalists or sports photographers, or if you do a little studio work. Now the Nikon, though, I think the Nikon is the nicest camera I have seen in the last 5 years. I was really blown away by this camera. It is better in low light. At ISO 12,800, there's almost no noise at all. The ergonomics are a little bit better, and this is my choice for those people that are shooting weddings and events. So if you're a photojournalist, a sports photographer, studio photographer, go with the Canon. If you're shooting weddings and events, go with the Nikon. Now, obviously, if you have a lot of money invested in Nikon lenses or Canon lenses, you're going to want to stick with that brand that you already have that investment in. But that's my recommendation. Now, please, if you like what you see, leave your comments and tell me what you thought of this video. I know I'm going to get beat up for this one, but I'd really like to hear what you have to say. So leave your comments, or you can tweet me on Twitter at jmarkwallace. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.
This episode is brought to you by Adorama TV. Visit the Adorama Learning Center, where you'll find photography tips and techniques, links to the gear used in this episode, and related videos. For all the latest photography, video, and computer gear, visit Adorama.com. And the next time you're in New York City, visit our store, located on 18th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue.